Alright, so we're ready for final construction. We have our lining in place inside of our doublet. We've whip stitched the top of the lining into the collar, alright, and everything is put together. We have bias tape on our epaulets, we have bias tapes on our sleeves, we have bias tapes on our panel for our overlap in the front for Rapier-legal doublets, okay? We start with the epaulet. I like putting the epaulet on before I put the sleeve on, but it doesn't really matter what order you put it in. I just think it's easier to sew this way, okay? Now the epaulet, you have two choices when you put the epaulet on. You can put it on with the bias tape out, okay? And you can see when it gets sewn on, what that does is it, kind of carries the bias tape from the sleeve hole into the epaulet, and it helps with the illusion of creating a narrow waist, because now you have wide shoulders. Okay. You can also put the epaulet on where the bias tapes match up. It doesn't matter. It's completely up to you. Where's that other doublet? I have my... Oh, there it is. Yeah. That's what I was going to say. You can see on this doublet, that's what I did here. So you can see that I lined the bias tapes up. And, all it does is just create a sharper cut right at the shoulder. And then we have the epaulet come off the edge. So it's completely up to you what you want to do with your epaulet as far as design goes. Either way, you attach them on the exact same way. Okay? I'm going to attach these with the bias tape out. Okay? So first, I want to pick the side of the epaulet that I want people to see. Because one side's going to be down, the other side's going to be out where people can see it. So pick whichever side. They should both be fashion fabric, so it's whichever side you think came out sewed better. Or shows the design better. You're going to fold it in half and find the center point. Okay? That center point is going to match up with the seam of the shoulder. Okay? And so you're going to place it right on the edge of the sleeve, like that, okay? So this is not a sew and flip, okay? You're actually putting it in the final position it's going to be in. Now pinning this can be a little bit of a chore because you got about a 1/4 inch of bias tape that you're pinning onto. What I do, so I find a pin that's not bent, is I insert from the doublet side through the bias tape. You can see how that comes out there, all right, and then I just poke through the epaulet, and that'll hold it in place well enough so that I can sew. And then I'm just gonna kind of, put it into place on the sleeve here. You only need a few pins because since you're going to be hand sewing this, this is just kind of to keep it in place while you hand sew. But you're going to be able to make adjustments to its position the entire time you're sewing. So it doesn't really need to be, exactly where you want it, okay? And it just needs to be close. All right, so now that I've got it pinned in place, I'm actually going to sew. Now we're going to use the same whip stitch that we used in the collar we used to attach the doublet. It's really, really simple, okay? So I take my double length of thread, okay? So that, I stretch it out, you saw it to an arm's length, okay? Cut my thread, thread it up, and I fold it in half. As before, I like to use a needle that is big and fat and has a nice large eye because it makes threading it a lot easier, okay? You can use whatever hand sewing needle you want, okay? I find it a little easier to start this one with a knot. If you really want to start this one with a knot, you can. If you don't want to, if you want to just, do it without a knot, you can do that. I'm still going to stitch the first stitch 3 times just to secure it in place. If I want to create a knot, I just wrap it around my finger and roll it off. And then I can cinch it tight, and look, there's a knot in the end of my thread. Okay? Now here comes the fun part. Okay? You can come a little closer, okay? I'm going to start, you can see I'm on the side of the double. I got my hand in the armhole, okay? I'm going to pinch the epaulet and put it into the place I want, okay? I'm going to insert my needle just under the lip of the bias tape on the sleeve. You see that? Okay? And then through the fold, the edge of the epaulet. And I'm going to pull my thread tight, okay? Now, again, anytime you hand sew, you don't need to strangle the thread. All it needs to be is snugged up. If you pull thread too tight, you can actually break it and anything else like that. When you're hand sewing, you can use what they call sewing wax, okay? And you can get it in Joann's or any other place where you buy sewing supplies, and it's a wax that you can actually put on the thread itself, and it makes hand sewing a little easier. It'll keep the thread from getting all tangled up. See, every time the thread goes through the fabric, it's abrasive and it actually breaks down the fibers of the thread. That's why you don't want too long of a piece of thread. Plus, working with it's a lot easier when it's, just arm length. So, I mean, that's why you don't need, a super long piece of thread. So, But you can see, all I'm doing is I move about 1/8 of an inch. I catch the lip of the bias tape. I push it through the fold of the epaulet. And I just keep going with that. Okay? You guys understand how I'm doing this? You see how it works. Okay? And I'm just going to do that all the way around. And when I get done, that's what it's going to look like. Okay? You can see the epaulet has been sewn on. And if you look really closely, you can see I used the black thread because I really couldn't find a thread to match this material. But, yes, you can see the stitches up close. You can't see them here. And that's all that really matters. From a distance, you can't see them. You won't even notice them and that kind of thing. And you can see how the epaulet looks once it's sewn on. Okay? Gives a nice shape to the sleeve. That's what it's for. Okay? Now we're going to pin a sleeve in. Since I've got one epaulet sewn in, I'm going to pin the sleeve in on the other side. All right? Now with the sleeves, some sleeve patterns, this one doesn't have a right and left, but if you do use a different sleeve pattern, some sleeve patterns do have right and left arms. Because we've done bias tape construction, I like to put the bias tape, close to the armpit, okay? So, and, that kind of thing. So how are we going to sew our sleeves in? Well, first we need to find the cap of the sleeve. The cap is the high point of the sleeve. In modern clothing, this high point goes right on top of the shoulder. It's because modern clothing is made to look good when you're standing still. Okay? However, we want movement. Okay? The whole point of the cap of the sleeve is to give you movement. The most movement you're going to need in your arms is when your arm goes across the chest, which means the most fabric you're going to need needs to be back here. So the cap of the sleeve is actually going to go right in the center, halfway between the shoulder and the armpit, in the back of the arm, okay? So when I fold my sleeve, you can see that's the seam that we've got, and that's the top of the cap, and I basically just centered it. I eyeballed it, okay? Doesn't have to be exact. As long as it's close, you're fine. You can just kind of go, that's about right, okay? Now, since this is my bias tape down here, that's where my end of my bias tape is, I'm going to make this the right arm. Okay? As you can see how that would fit in, and you can see that would be in the armpit. But since we're dealing with the left arm here, we're going to do the other sleeve. And I was smart enough when I sewed my sleeves, that the other bias tape sit down there also. So, but again, I've just done the same thing. So, this point up here is going to be at the top of the shoulder. And this point down here is going to be in the armpit. Now the first thing we want to do is we have to place right side to right side, because the way we flip this. So the first thing you're going to want to do is first flip your epaulet that you just sewed backwards. Okay. But again, like I said, I like sewing the epaulets on first because it does make it easier, because I can just put my hand into the sleeve hole. Okay. Now I'm going to turn my doublet inside out. Okay? remembering that this is my shoulder point. That I'm going to match that up with the shoulder seam. Okay? Now pinning this together, because there are so many layers, it is going to be very difficult. Try not to pin it near the edge because it's just too many layers. Just pin it down. Again, you're going to be able to make constant adjustments with this, so it doesn't really matter. Okay? So again, you can see I've got my sleeve pinched down here at the bottom where my armpit is. I need to find the armpit of my arm's eye, so I do just the exact same thing. I pull it. I match those two up, okay, and of course I pin, so that they stay in place, okay. Now, it doesn't seem like, it's going to fit, right, but what's really funny is if I just kind of push this cap down and match it up with the edge right in the center there, suddenly it all kind of falls into place, okay. And again, I'm just going to pin this. I'm really just kind of trying to secure it with a few pins. Again, it's not about precision at this stage when you're pinning because you're hand sewing. So, you can adjust as you go along. Okay? Nice thing about hand sewing is you can adjust as you go along. So, you may need to ease your sleeve in there a little bit because you're dealing with concentric circles, one circle inside of another circle, and they're both the exact same size. So you may have to reverse the curve a little bit or try to straighten it out to get them to match up a little bit as you're sewing. But it's not that big of a deal. Again, it's real easy because you will be hand sewing. Okay. So I've got my sleeve pinned in there, okay? And I know it's a little difficult to see because black on black on black on black. And you can take a closer look at that while I get my thread prepared for my hand sewing. Luckily I have 2 needles over here. Again, it's just a double length of thread. I'm using all-purpose thread. If you think you're going to be using your sleeves, moving around in your doublet a lot, like if it's a Rapier-legal doublet, I have used heavy duty, or what's also known as upholstery grade thread. I always sew my buttons on with upholstery grade thread, just because it's thicker, heavier duty thread, and it just holds better. The nice thing, since we have done a bias tape construction, when this sleeve rips out, because all sleeves rip out eventually, it's real easy to repair. It literally takes less than 5 minutes to repair, because all you're going to do is exactly what I'm doing right now and just re-sew it in. Because where it's going to rip out is the thread you're about to put in. So that's the nice part. Now I just pick a spot anywhere on the armhole. It doesn't matter where I start. I'm going to go around in a circle anyways, okay? I pinch the two sides together using my left hand, since I'm right-handed. And you can see what I'm going to do, okay? I'm just going to insert through the fold in the bias tape on both pieces. You see that? And I'm going to pull. And, so for the first stitch again, I will do a few stitches. And I want to make sure that the folds end up touching. Okay, so I may need to snug it up a bit, and give it a little bit of a tug. But then again, I just move 1/8 of an inch and I whip stitch. Okay, and I can do an armhole like this in approximately 10 minutes. It doesn't take very long at all. Okay, once you get used to the stitch, you can do this while watching a movie or your favorite TV show or whatever, sitting on the couch. And like I said, if this ever rips out, which it will probably eventually, sweat degrades fabric and thread. And, the part that's going to rip out is this thread I'm putting in right now. And so, and you can see I just inserted in 1/8 of an inch farther than my last stitch. And I just keep going. So, but eventually I would just go all the way around. When I get near the end of my thread, I do 3 quick stitches, and I you know, knot it off, and then I start a new thread with 3 quick stitches. It's that simple. I mean, this is not the complicated part. This is probably one of the easiest parts. Yes, it takes a little while to get used to your hand sewing. Now, again, when I hand sew, I wear my thimble on my middle finger so that I can push the head of the needle through that way. It's a lot more ergonomic, and it flows a lot easier. And like I said, normally I would do this while sitting down. It's a lot more comfortable, I think. And you can take pins out as you sew, but because I put my pins so far down, it doesn't really matter. They're not going to get in the way. You know, and again, you can see I'm just, you know, grabbing the folds. Make sure you don't sew the epaulet in. You know, you only want to grab the folds of the bias tape. But eventually, like I said, you will get all the way around, and you know what you'll be able to do is, you know, we're just going to pull this out, you know, you'll flip it out, and once the pins are out, it'll just kind of fall right into place. See how that works? All right. And so, yeah, that's basically how you put the sleeves in. The panel's going to go in after we put buttonholes in, because otherwise it gets in the way. Okay? But essentially, what I do is whatever side I have chosen to do the buttonholes on. In fact, I'll get this other doublet and show you with that. Okay? Or pretend like this is a Rapier-legal doublet, which it's not. That's why I don't wear it for rapier. All right, so first of all, which side do you put the buttonholes on is completely up to you. Historically, men's garments would have the buttonholes on the left side, and women's garments would have the buttonholes on the right side. The theory I've heard is because usually men dressed themselves, and usually women had somebody dress them. And if you're dressing somebody else, it's easier if the buttonholes are facing you, you know, for putting in, because most people are right-handed. It just works out better that way. Does it really matter? No. I have doublets with buttonholes on the left and buttonholes on the right, mostly because sometimes I forget to check which side I'm sewing buttonholes on, and then I sew them in, and it's like, oh well, I guess the buttonholes are going on that side, because it's really hard to rip out buttonholes once you start sewing them. Okay. So this one happens to have the buttonholes on the left side, meaning that once buttoned, the buttons will, the left side will overlap across the right. Okay. Now, obviously that leaves a gap for rapiers to go in, and we need to get the overlap. Okay. So if I was going to put this panel in this doublet, you can see where my buttonholes are right here. Okay, you see the buttonholes? I'm just going to take this panel, I'm going to put it right side to wrong side. Okay? Because that's what we want to show. Okay? And I'm putting it about 1/4 inch on the other side of the buttonhole. So now if I pick this up, you see you can't even see the buttonholes. Okay? If I were to let it fold over, you can see where it's lining up. Okay? And I start down near the bottom. Okay? So I start at the lowest buttonhole, and I go up. Okay? Because the top one's going to be covered by a gorget. It doesn't really matter. Okay? And then, yeah, once I get this, you know, I would just pin this in, and then I just whip stitch up the side. And I only need to catch the lining. I don't need to catch the outer. Okay? So I'm just securing it to the lining. So I just do a whip stitch along this edge, exactly like I just did the epaulette, catching piece of the lining and the edge of the bias tape, and just sew it in. Okay? So it's not that hard to secure this. If I have a trim line that goes up the front, I have been known just to straight stitch it down with the machine. Yeah. So, I mean, however you want to secure this, you can. Whip stitching it in, it takes no time at all. It's just a straight little thing. So, and literally, you know, once it's in, that's what it looks like. And so, you know, that's what it would look like. Okay? Buttons. When you sew them on, you can see the buttons are on the very edge of the fabric. Okay? I'm using these shank buttons, but you know, my green doublet, which I don't have here, I use buttons where you sew through the buttons. I did the exact same thing. I just did it right on the edge of the fabric. Okay? Doesn't matter, we have our panel for overlap, we don't need to set the buttons back. And it's much easier to sew them on the edge, because then you can just sew around in a circle. Okay? You go through the edge of the bias tape, you go through the shank, you go around the edge of the bias tape and back through, and then around and back through, and around and back through. You're literally sewing in a circle. If you use the upholstery grade thread, I go around about 5 times with the double set of thread, double width of thread. If you're using all-purpose, you may have to go around about 10 times. But, and eventually buttons, again, the material rubs on the thread, they eventually break, and they're eventually going to, that's why you always want extra buttons, okay? But once they're on, you can see how they're on, and even if I were to button this up, now this one doesn't have an overlap on it, okay? What I button up, I'm just going to do about 4 or 5 buttons here. You can see there's no gapping, there's no holes. I could pull on this, and there's no gapping or bunching or anything else like that, so you wouldn't see anything beyond. All right, so putting the buttons on the edge, not a big deal. All right. I use horizontal buttonholes, okay? Those are the period ones I've seen, everything else like that, and to me they just work easier. Can you use a vertical buttonhole? Yeah, but I think it's a little bit harder to do because it's a little bit harder to space it. So I'm going to show you how to do horizontal buttonholes, okay? Now, first of all, where to mark your buttonholes, okay? Hammer fabric, and typically what I would do is I would get my buttons, which I forgot the buttons today, so we're going to use some thimbles as pseudo button in here. I got a couple thimbles and a couple. All right, so we're going to use these thimbles as our buttons, okay? And what I would do is I would place the buttons on the fabric, trying to figure out what kind of spacing I want on my doublet, okay? Do I want it to be fairly close, as that doublet is, or about a 2-finger distance? Or would I rather have it spaced apart a little bit and maybe a 3-finger distance, okay? Typically, most doublets are 2 to 3 fingers, okay? You really don't want to go with a 4-finger distance on a doublet because then you do get gapping, all right? And if you want to go with a 1-finger distance, you can, but that's a lot of buttons to sew on, and a lot of buttons to do up, and a lot of buttons to undo, as Stephen has figured out. Esteban did his really, really close together, but I prefer a 3-finger distance to most of my doublets. This is your doublet. You want 3-finger? Okay, we're going to go with 3-finger difference, okay? So we have our distance that we want to do. And like I said, you can use the actual buttons and kind of put them on the fabric and say, I kind of like that, that distance there. Depending on the size of your buttons and how they look, that may make a difference as well, okay? Now, what I need to do first is mark the most bottom buttonhole. What was it? This is the left side. You want them on the right side? All right. Since this is a woman's doublet, we're going to do it on the right side. Okay. First, we need to mark the buttonhole that's on the bottom. Okay. Now, down here, we have a ton of fabric between linings and inner linings and skirting pieces and everything else like that. You can feel all the layers of fabric down here. Do not put a buttonhole on top of all these layers of fabric. You will curse the day you did that, okay? It's just a pain. Your buttonhole doesn't need to be at the very bottom, okay? You can find the space where, okay, the fabric kind of ends, and you mark that first buttonhole, okay? Then I'm going to measure up 3 fingers and mark the next one, and I'm going to measure up 3 fingers and mark the next one. This is the easiest way to do it. Okay? If you want to go through the process of measuring out this entire front length and then dividing it out for the exact number of buttons you want and trying to measure out that exact distance all the way up and down, you go right ahead. This is a lot easier. Okay? And I come up here, you can notice that my last buttonhole, if I went 3 fingers, would actually be in the collar seam. But again, just like down here, we have a ton of fabric. However, you will almost never button the very top button of the doublet. Just wasn't done, didn't look right. In fact, in period, what you'll find is they actually put a button loop up at the top. Even if the rest of the doublet has buttonholes, the very top would have a button loop. Okay? So I'm going to put a buttonhole up here just for the sake of, well, fashion. Okay? And what I'm going to do, since it's a little closer, I'm just going to space these out and even them out right here. There we go, that's about the same. There we go. Nobody's ever going to notice the difference, okay? You don't need precision here. And so we ended up on this doublet with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 buttonholes. Depending on how tall you are, will depend on how many buttons you use. Anywhere between 10 and 15 is typical for a 3-finger spread, okay? If you do closer, it's going to mean more buttons. Had we done 2 fingers, it probably would have been closer to 14 or 15 buttons rather than 10. Okay, again, how you space it matters. Okay? So this is how I mark my buttonholes. I will then sew my buttonholes and then line them up with the other side to sew my buttons. Don't mark the other side right now because your buttonholes aren't going to match up with these marks exactly. They're going to be close. You know, but you're going to mess the machine up and everything else like that. Now, for our video, I'm actually going to sew the buttons on this piece. Buttonholes so that, because it's just a little easier, I'm just going to mark some buttonholes on here, about every 3 fingers. Yeah. And because the thread's just going to show up a little bit better on this piece than it will on this piece. That's the only reason I'm doing them on this. Now, most machines have some kind of buttonholing stitch, okay? If you know your machine and you know how to use it, go right ahead. If you want to hand sew the buttonholes, we'll get to that later in the video, okay? I am actually going to show you how to hand sew a buttonhole, okay? It's not that hard. It takes time. And it's a little bit time consuming, but other than that, it's not really that hard, okay? All right, I'm going to set my machine up, so we're going to stop the video so that I can get ready to do buttonholes on my machine. Well, actually, we're just going to show you how to do it on my machine. So, my machine is similar to a lot of more modern machines. So, first thing you want to do is check your bobbin, make sure you have enough thread on your bobbin to do all your buttonholes. It sucks to stop halfway between. Most machines have a buttonhole foot that looks something like this. What's really neat about this is I don't have to measure the length of the buttonholes. This is the button I'm going to use for making the buttonholes. All I have to do is insert it into the foot and close it on the foot, and it's going to make the buttonholes exactly to that size button. Kind of cool, huh? Okay, need to switch my foot out. So on my machine, the foot just has a little trigger in the back, you know, and then I just set it on there, all right? So like I said, most modern machines, it's fairly simple process. First thing you're going to have to do is select the buttonhole stitch. Oh look, it looks like a buttonhole. Wow, that was easy. Okay. On my machine, I have to set the stitch length in the buttonhole area. Oh look, it looks like a buttonhole. Isn't that nice? And on my machine, I set the stitch width to the widest dimension. Like I said, you can read the instructions on your personal machine. That will help. Alright, so I have all that, and I need to do one more thing. On my machine, there's a little lever that I have to pull down, and look, it has a picture of a buttonhole on it, and they're amazing. So yeah, my machine is dead simple for doing this. Yes, David, you have that lever on your machine. He's over there checking his machine. Do I have this? Yeah, you have that. Okay. All right, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to insert my, this would be my doublet. Of course, all the material for the doublet would be there. And I would start at one end. I don't want the bulk of my material under my machine yet. Okay? Now, what I need to do first is I need to push this foot out with the back of my finger so I can see the line I marked. And I line it up with the center of the foot. Okay? There's a little mark here on the center of the foot, and that tells me where I'm going to form my buttonhole. Now, as to where I want to set my fabric, I want to start the buttonhole right on the edge of the bias tape. Okay, so I'm going to set this in here and let you guys come and take a look at it. But if you look through the window of the foot, okay, come here, you look through the window of the foot, you can see I've set the window right on the edge of the bias tape. You can't even see the bias tape through the window, okay? And that way, that's where the start of my buttonhole is going to be. Okay, typically, at least on my machine, the edge of the bias tape lines up right on the edge of my cover for my bobbin. Okay, so on my machine, it's really, really nice. I've got a nice little marker. But on this machine, yeah, you just what you want to look for is the edge of the bias tape. That's where you're going to start your buttonhole. Okay, all right. Now comes the fun part. Okay. All I'm going to do is I'm going to push this lever back, and I'm going to press the pedal. The machine does everything, and once the foot gets back to where it started, I pick my foot up and I stop pushing. Okay? If I wanted to go around a second time, well, I just push the lever again, and then I push the pedal. What happens is, on this machine, there's a little piece that comes out from the foot. As the machine moves, it will pop the lever forward, and that tells it to reverse direction and go back to where it started. Okay, so the machine does all the work. I don't have to do anything. And I can go around a second time if I really want to make sure things are secure. So I've gone around. Now, since I'm sewing a series of buttonholes, what I'll do is I'll just pick my foot up, and I'll slide my material over, and I'll center on the next mark that I've chosen for my buttonholes, and I'll sew the next buttonhole. Yeah, dead simple, real easy. I can literally do 15 buttonholes in less than 5 minutes. It's real simple, real basic, everything's nice, okay? I'm going to do a second buttonhole just to show you guys. Now, I'm using 4 layers of duck cloth here to show you guys that, it can go through all these layers, as we would normally. I had to help the machine out a little bit because of the thickness that we're dealing with and all the trim and the embellishments and everything else like that. You may need to tug on the material or give it a push to keep it going, okay? You got to kind of get a feel for your machine and what it can do. I'm going to go around a second time just to make sure. The faster you do this, the better your machine will behave. If you do this at a slow speed, it will not work. Okay? You cannot sew buttons at a slow speed. Alright? So, I'm going to pick this up and tear it out. Or I'm going to bring it on the machine. So, I need my seam ripper. Okay? Alright, so you can see I got a couple really cool buttonholes, didn't I? Alright? And I'm actually going to pull that button out just to show you this. Okay. Now, what I do is after the buttonhole is sewn, I will trim off all these extra threads. Okay? So that's probably the most tedious part of doing the buttonhole. And now I'm going to tear open the buttonholes. Use a seam ripper. It's the easiest way not to cut yourself. You can use a razor if you want the potential of slicing open your finger, but use a seam ripper, it's much better, okay? All I do is I insert the pointy end of the seam ripper into the buttonhole right at the end, and I'm just going to work it through, okay? I'm not pushing it through, I'm just gently working it through, all right? And then I'm just going to kind of try to, oh, that's a lot of fabric. And then I'm just going to use the seam ripper to kind of just rip along the line of the buttonhole, about halfway. And then I'm going to go into the other side and go the opposite direction. You want to avoid at all costs cutting any of the threads you just sewed into your fabric, okay? Now, I have a lot of layers of material here, so I'm really having to finesse this seam ripper through. Of course, if you have a really good seam ripper, it'll go right through this. My good seam ripper's at the house, because I left it there. But you can see, I've gone through my buttonhole. Isn't that cool? All right, really neat. And then I can just do the next one. Again, I just kind of work it in there. Be careful with this. Try not to force it. Try to just kind of do that. You have the potential for hurting yourself if you rush this, okay? Don't rush it. And like I said, don't try to use pinking shears or razor or anything else, because you need small precision cuts, okay? And like I said, I'm going through 4 layers of duck cloth right now with a little tiny crappy seam ripper, okay? If I can go through 4 layers of duck with that, you can go through anything else. And I have my buttonholes, and now watch, the button goes right through. Isn't that neat? Now sometimes buttons end up a little stiff. Okay, the buttonholes end up a little stiff. Here's how you widen the buttonholes. You take a pair of scissors, you insert it into the buttonhole, and you spread it out a little bit. Okay? And that will loosen up the buttonhole. Isn't that neat? Yeah, now the buttonhole goes right through. Yeah, so that's the easiest way to spread out a buttonhole, you know, and it's really safe. Again, you can just insert the closed pair of scissors, okay, and then you grab both handles and you kind of just, you know, spread them apart. Don't crank on them. Just kind of, you know, work it apart. Use your paper scissors. Don't use your fabric scissors. Okay. Finally, last thing, okay? This little bottle is called Fray Check, okay? Fray Check is wonderful stuff. It's essentially super glue for fabric, okay? It's not as sticky as super glue, but what it does is it will just protect the material. And all I'm going to do is, you know, this bottle's already been opened, is I'm just going to put some drops right on the edge, right on the buttonhole itself. This is not going to discolor your material. I've never had it ruin fabric or anything else like that. And it's not going to glue the buttonhole shut, okay? All it does is it prevents the edges of the fabric from fraying, okay? That's why it's called Fray Check. Again, you can get this wherever you buy sewing supplies. It costs like $2 for a bottle, and a bottle will last you for about 1,000 buttonholes. Okay, so it's not like it's expensive. But what it does, and it's good for Huffington. No, you don't do that. It does have fumes, so if you are one of those people who is susceptible to fumes, make sure you're in a well-ventilated area. But, you know, and you don't do more than 5 buttonholes at a time. You know, I once did an entire jacket with Fray Check, and it was like 60 buttonholes, and by the end of it I had a headache. So, you know, so this stuff does have fumes, so you have to be careful, okay? So that's pretty much it. Now I'm going to set up, it's going to take me a little while to set up to do a hand-sewn buttonhole, but I'm going to set up for a hand-sewn buttonhole, and then we're going to just videotape that, but that's pretty much it, okay? The only real difference between my doublets and the ones that you've seen here is that with my doublets, I will, instead of putting a buttonhole down here, I'll put lacing holes, okay? And I will actually lace up the bottom of the doublet and tie it to the top buttonhole of my pants. It acts as a point, it keeps the flap down and keeps the top of the pants up. So, you know, and that's a very period thing to do. I'll show you, it's on this doublet here. This is an old doublet, so instead of sewing the holes, I just used eyelets. But you can see, and what I do is I just take a piece of string and I kind of just lace it up like a pair of shoes. And it just kind of, it'll hold it closed. And I do that for the bottom of the doublet where normally the buttonhole would be, a little bit above it and a little bit below it. Just 3 sets of holes. And that makes it really nice, and like I said, it acts like a point to hold the front of the doublet up, okay? And remember, my doublets are typically done at the natural waist, and so the pants would fall down and there'd be a nice gap right there where my tummy would stick out. And so I don't like that, so I pick them up. But the doublets we've made them a little longer so that shouldn't happen. Of course, my doublets also have the points in the back for tying the pants. Okay, that's what this little flap is for here. That ties into the waistband of my pants and keeps them up in the back so I don't have a gap back there. Yes, my doublets and pants are like putting on a jumpsuit. I have to step in and then shrug into the shoulders, you know, and I have to plan my bathroom breaks very carefully. Okay, because getting out of it to do certain bathroom breaks is a pain. Okay, but you guys, if you want to come by and feel these buttonholes, you can see I put fairy check on these and you can't even feel it. Okay, I can tell you honestly, this doublet itself is, wow, like 15 years old at least. Okay, the buttonholes have never ripped out. They're fine and everything else like that. Yeah, I've had to re-sew the buttons on like 100 times, but you know, same thing with some of the buttons on the spiral cut sleeves, that kind of thing. I had to re-sew stuff on because stuff comes off, it gets caught and everything else like that. I'll be walking by a door and oh, my sleeve got caught. It's the danger of spiral cut sleeves. But yeah, but that's how we finish up and everything else like that. Like I said, I'm going to get this set up for a hand-sewn buttonhole and that's about it. The material to do my hand-sewn buttonhole. If I'm going to do a hand-sewn buttonhole, I need to actually cut the buttonhole first. Okay? Now I've cut the buttonhole and it's actually just a little bit smaller than my button. Okay? I want to be slightly smaller because as I sew the buttonhole, it's going to make it a little bit bigger. So if I cut the buttonhole just big enough for the button, it will get slightly bigger and be okay. If I cut it too big, you know. How did I measure this? Well, I marked with my buttonhole. I put my button on my fabric, and I drew a line on either side of it with my chalk, and then I just cut out a line right there. Okay, that's how I did it. Okay, so I've got my needle and thread. This is just standard all-purpose thread. You can use embroidery thread. It may make it a little easier because it will take up space a lot quicker, but you can use just general all-purpose thread. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to insert from the underside of my buttonhole, so the side that people are not going to see, and I'm going to be about a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch away from the cut I've already made. And I'm going to come directly up. Okay, and I'm going to pull that knot till it's secure. Okay, so there actually is a knot in my thread. I'm going to move over and I'm going to put the needle back in right next to where I just came out. Literally right next to it, as close to it as I possibly can, and I'm going to go down. Now I'm not going to pull this tight. Okay, I'm going to pull it until I have a nice loop. Okay, try to not get it all tangled up either. So here comes the magic. Okay, so I've got a loop of thread. I'm actually going to go up through the cut, the hole that I made for my buttonhole. I'm going to put my needle through that loop and pull it up tight. And you can see what that does. Okay, it makes a nice little stitch right there. And what's happened is the thread has caught the loop and has brought it to the edge of the hole. Okay? And then, again, I'm going to go right next to where I just sewed. I'm going to go in, and I'm going to make a loop, okay? I'm going to come back up through the actual buttonhole, through the loop. You can see I'm going right through the hole and right through the loop, the thread, and then I will snug it up. And as I go along, it will get, more and more threads going along the buttonhole. And as I get to the edge, I'm just going to go around in a circle as I do that. Okay? You can use this for doing eyelets. You can use this for doing, buttonholes, anything else like that. If you do it with an eyelet, that's just a little circle. All you need to do is punch a hole in the fabric, using an awl or a leather punch or something else like that. But again, like I said, the next stitch is just right next to the one I just sewed. And you may, if you're using all-purpose thread, you're probably going to have to take a little while to do this, okay? This is not a quick process, okay? This is probably, time to binge watch your favorite show for about 5 seasons, okay? Yeah, no. Depends on how many buttonholes you're doing. And, as you get better with this, of course, it's going to go faster and faster and faster as you go along. But, you can see it's starting to, take shape, and, it will eventually go all the way around just like this one. And it'll be more of an oval shape rather than a rectangle, okay? So can you do hand-sewn buttonholes? Yes. Is it a long and tedious process? Oh, yeah. Do I suggest it? No. But, it's completely up to you what you want to do. Like I said, using embroidery floss will make it easier, because with embroidery floss, you can use like 6 strands of thread at a time. It's a little thicker. It'll cover a little bit better and more completely. You can use upholstery grade thread. That's a little thicker too. Using all-purpose thread will make this take a really long time. But you can do it. Okay? So that's how you would do a hand-sewn buttonhole. Like I said, it's a process. But you can do a hand-sewn buttonhole if you want to. So if your machine doesn't do buttonholes, or you don't know how your machine does buttonholes, or you're kind of scared of it, yeah, do hand-sewn ones. Go right ahead. Knock yourself out. All right? All right, so that's it. Doublet is